Now that the PAC-2 won the first round, how do they plan to split the assets?
Conference realignment and expansion is always in the news, so we're back on the big mountain to keep you updated on what's going on with the PAC-12.
Hey, it's great to have you here. I'm JY. This is my good friend Steve. We just did a deep dive that was released on Sunday, went through about 40 minutes worth of information on the hearing, tried to give you guys a lot more information than what you're just seeing in the headlines. There's a few things here that I want to kind of go back and revisit just a little bit. We'll get into that balance of equity and kind of where the PAC-2 headed here, and maybe they just don't know yet. So the one thing I wanted to update everyone on is that the stay motion, and we gave some of those dates on that video, the stay motion now needs to be filed by November 17th. Replies are due by November 22nd, and then they will rule on that on December 4th. Ironically, December 4th is also when the transfer portal opens. So I do think that's just ironic. I'm not sure there's any rhyme or reason to that. But that is just the updated information on the stay. So the first piece I want to talk about was what came out in terms of penalizing USC and UCLA. And that'll kind of roll into my next piece, which is diving a little bit further into the course of performance. And then lastly, I want to get to that balance of equity piece for the PAC-2. So it was stated, and we talked briefly about this in the last episode, McMichael brought up that the board discussed penalizing USC and UCLA. However, no action was taken on this. And there was no penalties levied. Nothing really came of it. It was just discussed. The attorneys kind of went back and forth on that a little bit, as attorneys would do. Well, this is what they really said. This is what they really said. They didn't say a whole lot. Oh, they talked a lot about it. Yeah, okay. I would just say to that, we talked about the ruling at the end where the actions speak louder than words. I'll flip that around a little bit here and just say, okay, put the shoe on both foot there. There was no action done by the PAC to penalize these schools, and they certainly could have done that. So, I think that came out of the very end of our last episode. And I think you can say that to both sides. I certainly understand that was the judge's ruling in terms of how they were moving forward with this course of performance, which I'm going to get into in a bit. Levin did say, so Levin was the attorney for the departing 10. He was there for University of Washington, but really for the departing 10, said that there's no record that the penalizing of these schools was actually discussed by the board, meaning no meeting minutes or anything like that. This came from a memo, according to him, of a governing relations individual of the PAC-12. The conference has no discipline policy. McMichael then, the OSU WSU attorney, came back in their little pissing match, he said, she said type of thing, and said, he stated that there are minutes regarding penalties and board seats and votes, and words of the PAC-12 recusal is not a workable alternative. So, again, a pissing match about what was or what wasn't said. I don't really know, but I did want to just kind of point that out, that it kind of goes both ways. So let's get into this course of performance, because that was really one of the big things when you kind of put aside the harm piece of this. Let's focus on course of performance. And I'm going to read a couple definition types of items here, because, that you say those words and the attorneys want you to believe it one way, the way they want, the way they're providing their case or presenting their case. But there's really two things that exist in a course of performance. The first thing is the transaction includes multiple occasions of performance, not one single type of deal. So clearly that's here. I think both sides would be like, yeah, we're talking about multiple instances. The second piece I found really interesting. It says, the other party with knowledge of the nature of the performance and opportunity to object to it accepts the performance or acquiescences without objection. Now, we heard from Levine that said UCLA, USC, and Colorado all almost immediately objected to what the PAC-12 was saying. So if that's the case, and they say it's documented, again, I'm going to believe that it's truly documented. There was back and forth texts, emails, letters, whatever it may be, that USC, UCLA all said, we object to this, then it doesn't necessarily qualify for a course of performance. Now, I get it. What we talked about last time, I think you brought it up, and Kurt, certainly the judge is saying actions speak louder than words. And I can understand that, and that was his ruling. But the definition of course of performance would maybe lead you to believe something slightly different. You agree or disagree? Am I reading too much into that?
I don't know that you're reading too much into it. There's some ors in there, and there's some. When you sent this to me earlier, so I went and looked at that. It's the uniform code.
Yes.
Which is just kind of it's not actual law. It's just kind of established practices. So there's some room in there for legal ambiguity. So I don't think you're reading too much into it, but I think it's a good thing to kind of bring up that yes, they were performing in a certain way, but they did object. They did raise some objections, and I think both the current judge, and now going forward, that the Washington Supreme Court should look at that,
right?
How it was performed, but also take the fact that they did object into account,
right? And Levine then said he talked about both California and Washington courts and said they actually are very similar in this. So he's talking about California courts because that's where the Pac-12 is located, housed, their home base, if you will. And obviously Washington's the state that they're in this right now. But he says course of performance evidence for these two courts and states in terms of their laws. Course of performance evidence applies when parties are not in a dispute about the meaning of the contract. He's saying this is all about a dispute of the meaning of the contract. So, again, it's a little bit of talk from the attorneys here, but I do think they bring up a good point. And, whether or not, state by state, that can absolutely change. That's 100% accurate. So they have to really dive into, in this case, Washington State and what they do or don't allow under course of performance. But I think more to be had in that realm of things.
For sure.
The last thing I want to talk about, balance of equity. So this really came out, and we mentioned in the last time, I kind of got cut off in the last half hour of this. So I was able to go back, rewatch this, and they really focused, especially the UW side, focused on the fact that the PAC doesn't have a plan. Like, there's no plan to move forward here. So my teaser is maybe a little bit of a cop-out. How do they plan to move forward? Yeah. The answer from McMichael is, there's no plan. We have no plan right now. And really, Lavin, kind of used that against them. Whether right or wrong, I don't really know. But he was definitely making the argument that how can they bring this up and how can they have a PI when they don't even have a plan? Like, how can we trust anything that they're going to be doing? Because they haven't even put forth a plan. So the judge asked a question. He said, does the PAC-2 claim that the departing 10 forfeit their share of proceeds for 23-24? And, that gets then into his ruling where he kind of addresses that. But he asked that specific question. McMichael answered that question, no, it does not. We are not saying that, we being Oregon State and Washington State. No decisions have been made about how resources are going to be allocated moving forward. We will make reasonable decisions that are in the best decisions of the Pac-12. And of course, with this going through the Pac-2, but the Pac-12. McMichael also stated that they can't trust each other, or they can't trust the other 10. I'm sorry, they can't trust the other 10 because they won't do what is reasonable for the Pac-12. There's no loyalty, and it is a conflict of interest. And you've brought up conflict of interest several times. Lavin then countered this with the fact that all 12 have an interest in 23-24 operations, as stated in the bylaws, to provide, and this comes directly from the bylaws, like, why are we here? Why are we in existence? This is why. To provide members a governing body for their intercollegiate athletics, and to assist members in funding and promoting their interscholastic athletic programs. All 12 still have an interest to that definition in the 23-24 school year. And up until they leave, so from now until technically, I guess, August 2nd, they all have that same interest. I thought that was a really good point by him. No one is saying, according to him, no one is saying that the departing members want to end the conference. Now, I know there's been a ton of speculation that that's exactly what they wanted to do. They've now backtracked because of all of this, and they can't do it anymore. So now they just want to make themselves whole through this school year, 23-24. And that very well may be the case. We have no idea if that's really going to happen or not. But I will just say, I mean, certainly all 12 schools budgeted for revenues from the Pac-12 for the 23-24 year in full. Like their athletic budget, or however they budget that, would have been for a full year's worth of Pac-12 revenues. And some schools have that's a much larger portion of their budget than others. I get that. But they all would have budgeted for it. Levin also stated liabilities, that there's nothing in the record about liabilities. Again, nobody has brought this up about how are we going to share these? What are you going to do about this? Going back to that, there is no plan. How can you be bringing this when you have no plan to move forward? Then one last thing, and I'll let you chime in. He stated under California law, with no dissolution clause in the bylaws, which we talked about that early on last time, which there is not one, the members have the right to do that. They have the right to dissolve the conference because there's not a dissolution clause. Mm-hmm. However, no one has ever brought that up for a discussion or a vote. So again, I know people are going to say that's exactly what they were going to do, but I'm going to get back to our good old judge that, says action speaks louder than words. There's never been any sort of action. And frankly, I wouldn't even say there's been any sort of words. It's been speculation at this point that they want to dissolve the conference. But even with that, Levine said they absolutely could.
Yes.
They absolutely could under the bylaws and the law. So that's kind of where I'm at, Steve. What do you think about that?
All right. So I have a few big things.
Okay.
Big ideas.
Good.
Big comments.
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, I think that so as far as if they are planning to dissolve the conference, if they're not planning, if they want to or don't want to, when you look at the what the preliminary injunction was, what the TRO was, and the preliminary injunction was for control, it doesn't matter if they want to do it or if they don't want to do it or whatever. It matters, can they do it? And then that's why the judge asked both the Pac-12's attorney and the defendant's attorney in one of the very first hearings was, is there any, if I seat all 12 board members and let you guys vote, is there anything that would keep you from just dissolving it right now? No. Okay. And so that's what fed into that preliminary injunction is there a chance for irreparable harm? Yes. So, and really that's what this particular case is about. The preliminary injunction and now the appeal of that is, could there be irreparable harm? The plaintiffs want to stop that, want to stop them from having the ability to do it.
Yeah.
Now, another point is, when we talked about this from the beginning, is there has been probably a decade or more of mismanagement by the Pac-12 leadership.
Right.
2 commissioners in a row, and I'm not going to put everything on this commissioner, his predecessor, where the members of the board have not even been clear on what the liabilities were. Mm-hmm. There is I don't even say speculation. There is statements put on the record from Pac-12 employees that the previous commissioner told them to not worry about mispayments, errors in payments that created large liabilities. So I think we're still in a phase of whoever's going to be there, whether it's these 2 or whether it was just going to be USC and UCLA leaving and you had the other 10 maybe it's going to take a year or so to unwind all of this and figure out what those liabilities are, what the mismanagement was. Now, remember I talked about muddying the waters.
Yeah.
I think both sides are doing this, and I don't know why. I still don't know why the Oregon State, Washington State attorney brings up some of the arguments that he does, because I think they're unnecessary.
I agree.
But the other side is also definitely trying to muddy the waters.
Yes. There's
2 different legal arguments. Right now we're deciding on control of the board and it's a basic question of did they give notice or not to leave? That is the basic legal argument.
Yes.
And all of this other stuff is just muddying the waters, blood in the water, whatever. Because if the 2 teams are ruled to have control of the conference, those other 10 can still sue them for their share.
Yes.
So he's making arguments now for a potential another legal case later on where they would be the plaintiffs.
Right.
And I really think a lot of that is a bit unnecessary, but a bit of just an attempt to kind of muddy the waters when it comes down to the basic argument. Now, I still, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but I do think that both of them have some exposure. Both of them have some weaknesses to their sides, which, yes, okay, Oregon State, Washington State won round one, and they're expediting the hearing. But now what happens if we get to December 4th and they lose that hearing, and now the other 12? Because the other 12 they can say right now there's no plans to do it or whatever.
Yes.
They could have a meeting on December 5th and just dissolve it, and really there's not anybody that could do anything.
Right.
So I think both of them have a lot of danger, a lot of jeopardy.
Yeah.
And I know you're that's kind of what you teased at the beginning, is a settlement coming. It makes so much sense to have a settlement here.
Yeah.
You have a big pot of money. Everybody's going to go their own separate ways. Let's figure it out. Okay, are there some liabilities? Then maybe we'll pay off these liabilities. They now know what the Comcast liability, and I think that liability is actually due to be paid basically, I think, by like July 1st of next year.
Yes.
So they know what that liability is. Let's figure out, are there any other liabilities with the Pac-12 network? Let's figure this out and make everybody square, make everyone even, make everyone whole, because you could lose everything. So that's my last thought.
No, and I agree with it. And I gave you a hard time yesterday. I set you up, and then I laughed at you, and I apologize. I set you up because I said, I want you to tell me what you think.
Yeah.
If you agree, disagree, you don't really care.
Yeah.
And then you said settlement, and I said, oh, that's a cop-out. Well, no, it wasn't a cop-out. So I apologize. That wasn't a cop-out. I said you could say anything you wanted, and that's what you did.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with you. And I want to take that. That's how I wanted to end this. So
okay.
we didn't prep this.
All right.
That's a great segue into how I wanted to end it. And now this is my opinion. Yep. I think there's the more I read about all of this, the more we get into this. And we don't know all of the liabilities. And people just like to look over that. They're so focused on the revenues and how the revenues are going to get split up, and the assets and how the assets are going to split up. I really am concerned for the liabilities for the PAC-2.
Yes.
Because if this goes forward as is, right now, these other 10 schools are off the hook.
Right.
They are not members anymore as of... assume there wasn't a stay. Assume this judge's ruling is final. I'm going to go under that assumption right now, and they say, oh, fine. Well, we're not gonna pay you anything, which the judge said you can't do that. We have to be fair here, and I'm gonna say verbatim what he said about that. Yep. But you have to be fair here. And the more I thought about this, the more I'm thinking this really isn't all that great for OSU and WSU, because right now all of those liabilities are under the PAC-2.
Yeah, under the conference, which
could
be controlled by just those two.
Which could only be controlled by those two members. Yeah. So I'm really worried here, talking about a settlement. I want to push, if I'm OSU and WSU, and everything that I'm seeing, I get the feeling like they're coming at this from a side of confidence and authority, and this is giving them even more confidence. And I'm a little worried for them right now because of the unknown liabilities and them being the bag holders.
I think that's the big reason they don't want to just agree to letting everybody walk away with their fair share of this year's revenue, because they're thinking we may have some landmines coming up.
Yes,
and those teams were here. They were part of the problem, of mismanagement.
Right.
They're all together in this, of running up those debts and those liabilities. So if we let them just walk away with their share of the revenue this year without any further responsibility for those liabilities, we're basically let them walk off scot-free.
And I'll tell you what, I just think there's a ton of risk right now for these two schools. Way more than I think they... I don't want to say I think they understand. I think they understand it.
Yeah.
But being a two-member party of a PAC, you guys are holding the bag for all this. Now, I don't know how exactly the PAC document goes to the university. I mean, it's a separate organization, so if that dissolves, I don't know how much actual liabilities tied directly to the universities. But I just feel like there's a lot of risk, and I just want to end to your point about what the judge said. He ruled that the other 10 schools must be treated fairly. No one is going to take advantage of someone else, and that if that starts to happen, he will hear about it. He'll bring them back in. Yeah. Again, I just think there's a lot more risk here for these two schools than maybe I don't want to say maybe they realize, but certainly more than the headlines are having people realize right now.
Yeah, and I think that statement from the judge, I think that's, again, another way of him saying, hey, play nice,
Right.
and come to an agreement. Come to your freaking senses and come to an agreement.
Yes.
Or there bad things could happen to you one way or the other.
Agreed. And he started off with that, asking about mediation. Would more mediation, more time for mediation? I mean, that's what he's kind of been about this whole entire time. So, hey, that's all I had with that. I wanted to just break down a couple of those things. We maybe jumped over them a little bit. I definitely wanted to get back into the equity thing. I also wanted to get back. I wanted to give you a little bit of a tap on the back and say, I agree with you. The settlement answer is the correct answer. And I'm honestly more worried, I think, for Oregon State and Washington State than maybe a lot of people are right now because of the liability question. So,
can I make one last quick point? Okay, and so we've looked at this from a perspective of, because you're the Mountain West person, we cover the Mountain West. The opportunity, I guess, for a possible merger between those two and the Mountain West. And you said this, maybe the very first episode when we first started talking about this. If you're the Mountain West, do you want to get in bed with these two? Yes, it's great to bring these two awesome schools into your conference, either into your conference or into a merged conference. But do you want to get into a financial partnership with them when they still have all of this stuff hanging over their heads? So just wanted to bring that up again.
Totally agree. We haven't even talked about the name, likeness, and stuff that potentially could be based on per school and per conference. I mean, there's so much litigation stuff out there. It's crazy. So anyway, hey, we thank you for tuning in. We're going to keep on top of this. You know, I'm guessing it'll kind of be low here for a little bit till we get to those other stages in terms of the stays and appeals and all that kind of stuff. But wanted to get back on this just for a couple other of our thoughts. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time on the Big Mountain.